It is February 1944. The sky over southern Italy trembles with the hum of 1,000 engines. From the runways of Ramitelli Airfield, long rows of P-51 Mustangs sit gleaming in the morning haze, their noses shark-like, their tail fins painted a defiant, unmistakable crimson. The air smells of oil and dust, mingled with the metallic tang of anticipation. Men move briskly across the tarmac, strapping on parachutes, adjusting goggles, checking weapons. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echo faintly across the Adriatic breeze, a reminder that even in war life persists. Overhead, circling like predators, the Luftwaffe waits. To the Germans, this new American squadron, all black pilots, is a curiosity, even a joke. The enemy's taunts echo across radio frequencies. "Where are your white comrades, American?" they sneer. "Did you run out of real pilots?" They laugh because they do not yet understand what these men have endured just to be here, how every mission begins long before the propellers turn. For years they were told they could not fly. Not because of skill. Not because of courage. But because of color. Back home, in a segregated America still haunted by its own contradictions, the idea of a black man flying a combat aircraft, commanding a weapon of such speed, power, and precision, was unthinkable to many. Military psychologists called them unfit for leadership. Legislators doubted their intellect. Newspapers warned it would be a waste of taxpayer funds. Even as the nation proclaimed itself the arsenal of democracy, it chained its own warriors with the same prejudice it claimed to be fighting abroad. Yet here at Ramitelli stood the proof of their defiance. The 332nd Fighter Group, trained at the Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. 4 squadrons of disciplined, razor-focused aviators, the Red Tails. Their mission: protect American bombers as they plunged deep into enemy airspace. Their challenge: survive not only German fire but American doubt. The contradiction is brutal. The United States, a nation fighting for freedom, entrusts its bombers to men it does not fully trust. The Luftwaffe, defenders of a racist empire, mock their existence. Between these two forces, high above the battlefields of Europe, a group of young pilots prepares to prove something larger than victory, to show that dignity, once airborne, cannot be shot down. The story of the Red Tails is not just a military chronicle. It is a test of human conviction, a struggle to rewrite the boundaries of belief in midair. They trained under Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a man of rigid composure and unbreakable discipline. Davis knew what his men were up against. He had graduated from West Point without a single classmate speaking to him for 4 years. He led not through anger but through precision, the kind of quiet excellence that left no room for excuses. Their aircraft, first P-40 Warhawks, later P-47 Thunderbolts, and finally the sleek P-51 Mustangs, were not just machines of war. They were symbols of equality forged in aluminum and fire. The crimson paint on their tails was not chosen for decoration. It was chosen for recognition, so bomber crews, white crews, could spot them easily and say, "The Red Tails are with us." And in time those words became more than comfort. They became a promise. But in early 1944, that promise was still untested. The German Luftwaffe was the most experienced air force in the world, forged from 6 years of ruthless combat. Its pilots were veterans of Poland, France, the Eastern Front, aces like Erich Hartmann and Heinrich Oehler, men who had racked up hundreds of kills. They flew the fearsome Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, sleek, deadly machines designed to dominate the sky. They saw the Red Tails as easy prey, inexperienced, slow to react, unsure in combat. Their taunts carried both arrogance and ignorance, a belief that superiority was written not in skill or training but in blood. That belief would not survive the spring. The Red Tails took to the sky with methodical discipline. They flew tight formations, refused to abandon their bomber escorts to chase kills, and earned a reputation for reliability. Bomber crews began requesting them by name. The men who had been told they lacked the temperament to fly now protected the lives of those who once doubted them. Still, each mission exacted a cost. The roar of the engines masked the fear that every pilot carried, that their parachutes might not open, that if captured, they would face not just the enemy's bullets but his ideology. For the Tuskegee Airmen, every takeoff was a confrontation not only with death but with history itself. Visually, archival footage shows gun cameras flickering with tracer fire. A German 109 spirals downward, smoke trailing like a black ribbon against the white clouds. In the cockpit of AP-51, the pilot's gloved hand tightens on the control stick. His voice crackles through the radio. "This is Red Leader. Stay tight. Protect the bombers." And somewhere above Austria or the Danube Valley, a legend begins to take shape. One kill, one escort, one mission at a time. By the end of the war, the Red Tails would fly more than 15,000 sorties, escort over 200 bomber missions, and shoot down over 100 enemy aircraft. Their kill ratio rivaled, and at times surpassed, that of any white fighter group in the theater. More importantly, they lost fewer bombers under their protection than any other Allied escort group. But these statistics tell only part of the story. What truly matters is what they proved. To the Germans who learned too late that mockery is not a weapon. To the Americans who discovered that patriotism has no color. And to the world, which saw in those Red Tails the first flash of a future still struggling to take flight. This is a story born of contradiction, of men excluded from the promise of freedom, yet fighting to defend it. Of a nation that segregated its heroes, yet depended on their courage. Of enemies who laughed, only to be silenced by defeat. In the skies above Italy, Germany, and the Balkans, the Tuskegee Airmen did more than escort bombers. They redefined what it meant to belong to a country, and what it meant to rise above its flaws. Their victory was not measured in kills alone. It was measured in the breaking of barriers, in the shattering of myths, and in the echo of their engines, a sound that said to every doubter, "We are here. We are capable. We are free." In the end, the Red Tails did not just win the battle for the skies. They won the battle for belief, proving that in war the strongest weapon of all is not steel but the human spirit. The winter of 1943 drags across the Italian peninsula like a gray shroud. In the southern skies, Allied bombers climb toward the north, lumbering fortresses of aluminum and hope, while the German air defense sharpens its claws. From their bases near Foggia and Bari, the 8th and 15th Air Forces launch daily missions against rail yards, oil refineries, and aircraft factories in Austria, Romania, and southern Germany. But each mission bleeds men and machines. Bomber crews call it the meat grinder. Enemy fighters slice into the formations like wolves, diving from the sun, cannons blazing. Entire squadrons vanish in minutes, black smoke curling across the sky. At command briefings, one grim statistic repeats like a curse. Losses above 20% are unsustainable. The U.S. Army Air Forces need fighter escorts, reliable, disciplined, unbreakable. And in the dusty training fields of Alabama, such a group has been waiting. Act 1. The build-up, the long road from Tuskegee. Before they ever saw combat, the Tuskegee Airmen fought another kind of war, against disbelief. At Tuskegee Army Airfield, red clay stained their boots and sun baked the flight line. The men trained under relentless scrutiny, every maneuver recorded, every mistake amplified. They knew the unspoken truth. One failure would not just ground a pilot, it could ground the entire race. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., commanding officer of the 332nd Fighter Group, set the tone early: "You will be judged not as individuals but as representatives." He spoke softly, but his words carried the weight of centuries. The pilots studied everything: gunnery, formation tactics, fuel management. Among them were names that would later echo through history. Lieutenant Lee Archer, calm and analytical, destined to become one of their top aces. Lieutenant Charles McGee, a quiet strategist with an instinct for survival. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, whose calm under fire would become legendary. And Lieutenant Daniel Chappie James, whose voice could both command a squadron and lift its spirit. They trained longer, harder, cleaner than any other unit. When the Army doubted their readiness, Davis demanded a test: the 99th Fighter Squadron be sent to the front. The result? Skepticism turned to silence. By early 1944, Davis's 332nd Group was transferred to Italy, to join the 15th Air Force. Their aircraft, still hand-me-downs, were older P-40 Warhawks and later P-47 Thunderbolts, tough but limited. Yet even with obsolete planes, their escort missions began to earn notice. A bomber crewman recalled. "They never broke formation. You could feel them there, like a shield around us. We started looking for those red tails every time we flew." Act 2, the turning point, the arrival of the P-51 Mustang. The transformation came with a sound, a deeper, smoother roar. The arrival of the P-51C Mustang changed everything. Sleek, fast, and deadly, the Mustang was the finest escort fighter of the war. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine could take it to 30,000 feet and beyond, matching Germany's best. And when the Red Tails received their first shipment in July 1944, they knew, now they could fight on equal terms. Davis stood on the flight line as the new aircraft rolled in. The sunlight caught their aluminum skin. A paint crew began the ritual, the tails dipped in bright crimson. It was a statement and a challenge. See us. Remember us. Their first missions with the Mustangs were long-range escorts deep into enemy territory, to Munich, Berlin, and Vienna. The 332 ND's orders were clear: protect the bombers, stay disciplined, do not chase kills. Other fighter groups sometimes broke formation to hunt German planes, leaving bombers vulnerable. The Red Tails did not. At first, the white bomber crews were uneasy. Some didn't know these men were even pilots until they met them on the tarmac. But trust in combat is earned by action, not appearance. In July 1944, the Red Tails escorted bombers to Ploesti, Romania, one of the most heavily defended oil targets in Europe. They fought off waves of German interceptors, Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, even the new Me-262 jets. The bombers made it home. Losses? Near zero. After that, a new phrase began spreading through the 15th Air Force. Give us the Red Tails. Act 3. Confrontation. The Sky Wars. Now the Germans took notice. Luftwaffe intelligence reports described a Negro fighter unit showing unusual discipline. At first, German pilots mocked them. Then they began to fear them. Over Austria and southern Germany, dogfights flared like brief, violent storms. The radio channels crackled with tension. Red leader to all units, bogies 11 o'clock high. Copy red leader. I see them, Messerschmitts. Titan formation. Stay with the bombers. Gunfire rattled through the sky. Machine guns flashed. The Red Tails flew in pairs, one fires, one covers. Their formations were tight, their discipline absolute. In the cockpit, Lee Archer's breathing was steady. He once said, "When I was flying, the only color I saw was silver, the enemy's aircraft." He would go on to shoot down 5 confirmed German fighters. Others followed. Roscoe Brown downed a Me-262 jet, one of the first to do so. But victory was never without cost. The sky has no mercy for courage. Pilots who didn't return were mourned not with tears, but with silence. Their empty bunks spoke enough. Emotional fragment. Letter home. A letter from Lieutenant Wendell Pruitt to his mother. We're doing fine, Mama. Sometimes I look down at the clouds and wonder if you can see me. Tell the folks back home we're not just flying, we're making history even if nobody writes about it yet. Act 4. The human element, between fire and faith. Ramitelli Airfield, 1944. Nights were long and quiet. The sound of crickets mixed with distant thunder. Sometimes weather, sometimes artillery. In the officer's tent, the men gathered to talk, play cards, or listen to records. Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald. For a moment, the war felt far away. But in the morning, the smell of aviation fuel, gun oil, and fear returned. Mechanics, many of them black ground crewmen, worked through the night, patching bullet holes, reloading .50 caliber belts, checking propellers. They took pride in every aircraft they touched. A mistake meant death for a man they called brother. Discipline was religion. Davis demanded professionalism even when others gave none in return. When white officers questioned his men's competence, he answered not with anger but with results. The mission comes first, he said. Let performance speak louder than prejudice. And it did. Act V. Consequences, 100 kills and a legacy in smoke. By early 1945, the Red Tails legend had taken shape. Their record: 15,533 sorties, 1,578 missions, 112 confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat, another 150 on the ground, 66 pilots killed in action. They destroyed trains, convoys, and fuel depots across occupied Europe. And most remarkably, bomber losses under their escort averaged less than half that of any other unit. When the war ended, bomber crews sought them out to say thanks. One veteran of the 483rd Bomb Group said, "We didn't see color up there. We saw red tails and we knew we'd get home." For the Luftwaffe, humiliation turned to disbelief. Their once proud aces had been outflown by men they mocked. German prisoners reportedly muttered, "Schwarze Teufel, black devils." It was the enemy's unwilling compliment. Act 6. Reflection. The sky changes forever. When the guns fell silent in May 1945, the Tuskegee Airmen returned home expecting at least acknowledgement. Instead, they faced the same segregation they had left behind. The irony was unbearable. Men who had flown over Hitler's Europe were still denied service in their own country. But history had shifted. Quietly, irrevocably. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, integrating the U.S. Armed Forces. Behind that signature stood years of courage, and the undeniable record of the Red Tails. Colonel Davis became a general. Lee Archer joined the ranks of America's first black aces. Charles McGee would serve in Korea and Vietnam, flying more combat missions than any pilot of his era, over 400 in total. The Red Tails' legacy had moved beyond war. They had turned doubt into data, prejudice into performance, and mockery into memory. As newsreel footage fades, the narrator's tone softens. They fought 2 wars, one against fascism abroad and one against discrimination at home. And somehow they won both. The Red Tails' 100 confirmed kills were more than numbers on a board. They were symbols, proof that character, discipline, and unity can pierce even the hardest armor of hatred. Above all, they redefined what victory means. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about vindication. The German pilots who once laughed at the Neger flyers would later describe them in post-war accounts with a kind of grudging awe. They never broke. They flew like machines, but they fought like men. And in those words, spoken by the enemy, lies the heart of the story. For the Red Tails, triumph was not in revenge or reputation. It was in the silence of their critics. In the steady roar of engines carrying bombers home. In the knowledge that, somewhere between the clouds and conscience, they had finally proven that freedom, when tested, has no color. The Red Tails had changed the sky, and in doing so began to change the world. The war ended. Europe lay in ruins. The skies that once thundered with conflict were silent now, filled only with the whisper of wind over abandoned airstrips and rusting fuselages. The Red Tails came home as heroes. But the parades were for others. When their ships docked in New York and Norfolk, there were no bands waiting, no brass shining, no applause. They stepped onto American soil wearing the same uniforms that had commanded the skies, and still they were asked to sit at the back of the bus. The cruel irony was complete. They had fought fascism abroad, only to return to its echo at home. For many, the transition to peace was harder than war. Lee Archer, one of their greatest aces, later said quietly, "We had more respect from the Germans we shot down than from some Americans we fought for." And yet, they carried themselves with the same discipline that had defined them in combat. They refused bitterness. They chose legacy. The Tuskegee Airmen wrote letters, gave speeches, visited schools. They spoke not of anger but of possibility, that excellence, once proven, could not be erased. They had shattered the most dangerous myth of all, that worth could be measured by color. Slow montage of black pilots walking across dusty airfields, superimposed with archival footage of Truman signing Executive Order 9981. In 1948, when President Harry Truman ordered the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces, his pen moved on the strength of their example. The Red Tails had not just changed minds, they had changed policy. Their flight had altered the course of a nation. From then on, the U.S. military could no longer pretend that courage came in shades. But history's justice is rarely swift. For decades, their story remained half-told, a footnote in official histories, a photograph in a forgotten archive. The nation they helped save struggled to acknowledge them. But time, like truth, has a way of returning to the surface. In later years, the Red Tails were rediscovered, their legacy restored through documentaries, films, and reunions. When President George W. Bush awarded them the Congressional Gold Medal in 2007, many of the surviving pilots were in their 80s. They stood in neat rows, shoulders straight, eyes forward, just as they had at Ramitelli 6 decades before. The applause that day was thunderous, but beneath the clapping was something deeper, a recognition long overdue and a quiet national apology. For the Germans who once mocked them, the war's end was its own reckoning. Many Luftwaffe aces, their once proud empire in ashes, would later admit admiration for their opponents. Some even wrote it plainly. They flew with precision and courage. We underestimated them. History had reversed its lens. The mocked became the masters. The inferior became the immortal. It was a moral inversion as powerful as any military victory, proof that prejudice is always a fragile weapon, easily broken by performance and dignity. The Red Tails' triumph went beyond warfare. It spoke to something ancient, the human hunger to rise above limitation. In every engine they started, in every formation they flew, they declared a truth older than flight itself, that freedom is not given, it is earned through perseverance, discipline, and faith in one's own worth. Their courage was not the reckless kind born of glory, it was patient, principled, and unyielding. It came from the quiet understanding that history was watching, that every maneuver, every escort, every restraint would echo far beyond the war. U.S. Air Force cadets of all backgrounds walking across an airfield. A crimson tail fin gleams in the sunlight. Today their spirit lives in every cockpit that bears that flash of red. Every pilot who salutes before takeoff carries a fragment of that legacy. Their example did not just open doors, it built runways. And across generations, that crimson color has become something larger than a squadron's insignia. It is a reminder that belief, when disciplined by excellence, can rewrite the boundaries of the possible. In war, victory is often measured in miles gained or enemies defeated. But the Red Tails achieved something rarer. They won a moral victory that outlasted all others. They proved that the truest form of strength is not dominance but dignity. That faith, in oneself, in one's comrades, in one's purpose, can outfly even hatred. Their story is not just a chapter of history. It is a mirror, showing us what a nation can become when it listens to its own ideals. Final sequence. Fade to black and white footage of Red Tails taxiing for takeoff. Engines roar, camera lingers on the red-painted tails disappearing into the horizon. As their planes lifted from the runways of Ramitelli, the dust rose behind them in a long shimmering wave. That dust was history, rising, settling and rising again. Above it all, the sky, the same sky they once fought to claim, remains vast and open, indifferent to color, receptive only to courage. The Germans taunted them. America doubted them. But the Red Tails kept flying, until the sky itself remembered their name. Dedicated to the men of the 332nd Fighter Group, the Tuskegee Airmen. Their courage changed the course of the war, and the conscience of a nation.